Hey, welcome into this video. Today we're going to talk about 15 things that you really ought to know if you're using Photoshop in this day and age. Some helpful things, some easy things, some technical things, a little bit of everything mixed into one. If you use Photoshop, you're going to find this helpful. You're going to enjoy it. Today's video is sponsored by our friends at Envato. More on that later. Let's jump into Photoshop right now and get started. Let's jump into Photoshop here and take a look at our first technique, and it is just an interesting way to dodge and burn. When you are dodging and burning, you're just looking to add more light to the light and shadow to the shadow. So what I normally do is set up two curves layers to begin my dodge and burn, and I will set the top layer to multiply. I will select the mask and hit Command or Control I to just invert the mask and fill it with black. I'll select the second curves layer and set it to the screen blend mode, which brightens everything up. I will also select that mask, Command or Control I, to fill it with black. All right, then I'm gonna grab my brush tool, and I'm just gonna grab kind of a smaller brush here, maybe something about that size, about 50 pixels, let's say. Now this is obviously for this specific image, and I'm gonna set the hardness to 100%. Now I'm going to paint with my foreground color set to white. And all I'm going to do is just paint these kind of hard lines over areas of the image that I think would be interesting to make a little bit brighter. So here, and we could zoom in a little bit on her face. And I would say like, hey, maybe we'll add a little bit of light up here on her forehead, maybe here underneath this eye, make my brush a little bit smaller, bring some light down here, down her chin, right there beneath her nose. Just different places where you think it would be interesting to add a little bit of additional light. Right here along the highlights that are already naturally in her hair, something like that. It does not at all have to be exact. Cool. Now that we have that, great. We're going to go up to the multiply blend mode. Now remember, this is going to be our shadows, and I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to say, hey, maybe out here along the edge of the arm, I want to just add a little bit of just boost to the shadows. Down here underneath the chin, just beneath the lips, just on the bottom side of the nose, maybe on that camera left side of her nose as well. All around the edge of her face, just really establish that hairline nicely, and then cut in the cheek a little bit here on this side as well, maybe a little bit on that side, and just a little bit of shadow there on that side of her head. Maybe thicken up the eyebrows just a touch. They don't really need to be thickened up that much if I'm being totally honest. And then just add a little bit of shadowiness down the center of her hair. Looks really bad. It just looks like we scribbled all over the picture of her, which is essentially what we've done. But now you select the mask, and up here in your properties panel, you use your feather slider. Just crank that feather up to whatever, I don't know, 50, 60, 70%, and it's gonna blend those straight lines in, and you can come in here and just increase that feather or decrease the feather until you get exactly the look you're looking for. So there is before and there is after we have done our dodge and burn. And I can always look at it and say, you know what, I want that shadowiness to be more pronounced, or I want it to be blended into her skin a little bit more. Whatever you think is going to look better, you have the option to do that with this sort of, use that feather slider to blur your dodge and burn mask in the properties panel. All right, the second thing that we want to take a look at is the sticky rotate tool. This might sound novel. What we're going to do here is we're going to zoom in on this guy's face, and let's say we are trying to draw a selection along the side of his face with the lasso tool or something that's not technically the proper way to do it. But I prefer drawing with my lasso tool going flat across the screen like this, and I just find when I draw up and down, I can't quite get the line to stay exactly where I want it to go. Well, you can press and hold the letter R. Now, don't just press it once, press and hold it. You can rotate the image, and Photoshop will kick you right back to the lasso tool just as you were using it before. And then you can press and hold R again and rotate back upright or whatever you like, and take a look at the selection you have created. Now, obviously, this is kind of a dumb example, but the point being, you can click and hold to quickly switch to a tool, and then Photoshop will drop you right back to the other tool. Particularly useful with that rotate tool when you're in close on somebody's face, maybe retouching something and you need to just tilt and shift things. But it really works with pretty much any tool. You can hold the space bar and that switches you to the hand tool. That's also a sticky hotkey. So hold down that letter R and use that sticky rotate tool. So our sponsor for today is Envato Elements. What's Envato Elements? If you are a logo designer, a graphic designer, a photographer, a retoucher, a photo manipulation artist, a digital artist of any type, you just work with illustrations, let's say, really anything to do with Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, you work even in Premiere or After Effects, Envato Elements has something for you. Here's how it works. It's a big old marketplace. You sign up for a subscription and you immediately have access to millions of different assets that you can download, use in your projects, and you don't have to worry about like copyright and all that nonsense. You download it, you use it, you sleep easy. You're practically losing money if you don't get one of these subscriptions. Oh, there's unlimited downloads as well. You don't have to worry about hitting some limit where you get 10 assets and then you're out the door. Nope. You can download as much as you want and as often as you want for your subscription price. What am I talking about when I talk about assets? I'm talking stock photos, I'm talking stock video, stock audio, I'm talking brushes and patterns and templates, InDesign templates, PSDs, full-fledged interfaces and social media graphic design packets, media kits, all sorts of different things that you will use and you will love. There's WordPress website templates, there's motion graphics, there's graphics of this and graphics of that, vectors of this, vectors of that, thousands of different images, and just you name it, it's probably over there. You gotta check it out. Use that link down in the description below. Sign up today, grab your subscription. When you do that, you help support this channel as well. So thank you for checking out Envato Elements, and thank you, Envato, for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the tutorial. All right, so check this out. The opacity sliders in Photoshop have a lot of hidden tricks that you can employ that really will save you a lot of time. I'm gonna focus here on this word, tricks. And I've just selected that text layer. And with opacity, of course you have your opacity slider. You can click, you can slide it back and forth. We all know that. That's not what we're here to talk about. What I'm here to talk about is you can press any of your numbers, 2, and you get 20% opacity. 7, 5 in rapid succession, you get 75% opacity. 1, 4, and you got 14% opacity. 0, you're back to 100% opacity. You can also hold down Shift and use any of the numbers. Shift 7 gives you 70% fill opacity. Shift 0 gives you 100% fill opacity. Now, you may notice if you have a tool like the brush tool selected, you have opacity and flow here with the brush tool, and Photoshop favors that. So if you have something like the brush tool selected and you hit 5, it's going to change the opacity not of the layer, but of your tool. Hit 0, you're back to an opacity of 100%. Now there also is flow. And flow, you hold down Shift and say like Shift 6, and there we've got a flow of 60. If we go flow 6, 6, then it's gonna be a flow of 66. Shift and 0, your flow is back to 100. Now, one other little thing is on these opacity and flow sliders, it's the same with the opacity and fill sliders in your layer. If you hover over the word, you get this little scrubby slider. You can click and slide back and forth with both of them. If you hold down Shift while you scrub, you increase and decrease in increments of 10. So you zip way down and zip way up. If you hold down your Alt or Option key and you do that, it really slows down how quickly the slider moves, so you can really dial in quickly and precisely the opacity or flow or fill that you want for any particular layer or tool here in Photoshop. Okay, next up, I want to talk about smart objects, and of course we should be using smart objects. They might be a little clunky feeling at first, but they really do save you a ton of time, and there's a lot of great things you can do with them. Take, for instance, this little, funky collage. You have all these images, and let's say we're looking at it and saying, we really want to get rid of like the green and the blue in these images. Well, if we start using our adjustment layers and we do hue saturation and then we start desaturating stuff, well, we desaturate the entire image. Now, of course, you do have some control. You can use what's called a clipping mask, hold down Alt or Option, clip that hue saturation layer just to layer 4, which would be our owl layer here. But that's also kind of annoying because then I'm adding another hue saturation layer down here to the elk, and then I need to do another one for the polar bear. It just gets wacky and wonky and complicated, overly complex. Check this out. If we right click on any one of these layers or just come up here to Layer and choose Smart Objects, Convert to Smart Object, we can just use the standard image adjustments, hue saturation, for instance. Our saturation dialog box, hue saturation dialog box pops up. We can say, hey, give me the greens, desaturate those puppies, and then give me those yellows and desaturate those puppies as well. And guess what? That hue saturation adjustment is contained within this smart object. Right here on our layers panel, there's that hue saturation adjustment. Totally non-destructive. We can double click it. There's our hue saturation dialog box. We can go right back into those yellows. You can can see there's the -71 saturation we applied. You can click on the little line doodad and up will pop this blending options dialog, and you can change the blend mode and the opacity just as if it was an adjustment layer. So do not sleep on your smart objects. You can apply adjustments directly to smart objects. I can even hit like Command or Control I, do an invert, which would be image adjustments invert, and it applies it to the smart object as if it's pixels. But if we look here, it's applied it just as another one of the adjustments, and I can just drag it and throw it in the trash, and my image is exactly back to the way I want it to be. So convert stuff to smart objects, apply those adjustments to smart objects for maximum editability down the road. Let's talk really quickly about merging layers. There's a couple hotkeys that you really ought to know. They can be super duper helpful whether you're a photographer or a graphic designer working in Photoshop. First and foremost is the hidden hotkey, Command Shift Option and the letter E. Just takes all of your layers, merges them up to one new layer, and then you could take this layer and export that as an image. Maybe you're doing a bunch of different variations of something and you just want to keep creating these versions here in the layers panel. That's an easy way to do that. That hotkey, what it does is it merges all of the visible layers. So if I, let's say, shut off the uniform layer on top and I just want to merge together all this colorful stuff on the bottom, I can hit Command Shift E and nothing happens. Why is that happening? Well, what's happening is this top layer is shut off visibility-wise. So Photoshop just goes kind of wacky a little bit. It doesn't really know what to do. The way around this is you just create a new layer. If you create a new layer and then you hit your Command Shift Option E, it's always going to work for you, and it's always going to merge all those visible layers, pop it up to that new layer you created, and just work right. But that's not it. Let's say you've got a rather complex document like this, and I just want to take all the artwork here, all these smart objects, and I want to select all them, and I just want to merge all these up to a new layer. Well, you can select all the layers just like that, select the top layer, and then hold down Shift and click the bottom layer, and use the hotkey Command Option E. That would be Control Alt E on the PC. It's going to merge these puppies up to their own new layer. There they are. And only those layers have been merged up to this top layer, and maybe I want to do something like make a richer color out of it or something. I don't know, whatever it could be. But those are a couple little merge layer functions that you really, really ought to know in Photoshop. They're going to make your life a whole lot easier and a whole lot more fun. Oh yes, on to the next one. We're talking about exporting images. And before you skip this part of the video, because exporting images is boring, it is boring. But there are a couple really, really interesting things here and some things that I see a lot of people asking questions about, and one really wonky thing that I think Photoshop frankly needs to fix. Let's talk about exporting images. So first and foremost, you have a multi-layered image here. You just want to export the whole thing. Of course, you go File, Export, Export As. Up pops the export dialog like so. You choose, hey, I want a PNG, I want transparency, I want to change the image size or whatever. And then you just hit Export, choose where you want to save it on your hard drive. Done. Pretty straightforward. Now you can come in here and just choose to export a single layer by selecting the layer, right-clicking on it, and choosing Export As. Up will pop the same dialog. You can see none of the junk on top of it, just our background layer, and we can export just an individual layer. Okay, that's cool. We can also export multiple layers as one file by taking all of these layers and grouping them together. So let's say we want to just export all of the little labels, right? New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina. So we're going to start with California here. We're going to hold down Shift and go up to Michigan there, and we're going to group these Command or Control G. And with this layer group, we can right click it and we can choose Export As. I need to pull the layers panel in on screen where you can see it. I can right click this and choose Export As. Boom, up pops this. It looks like nothing's there, but if you look closely, all of our little tags are there, and you may want something like a PNG because presumably you'd be reassembling this somewhere else. But you can see those very light yellow name tags. At least I hope you can see them. I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to undo creating that layer group. Let's seal up our layers panel over here once again. Now, if we don't have a layer group, I just undid that layer group, and we just have a bunch of individual layers. With a bunch of individual layers, and here I go. I got to pull my layers panel out again. I'm not thinking ahead here. I can right click out here over the name of the layer and choose Export As. And what's going to happen is Photoshop is going to say, hey, you got a bunch of individual layers, buddy. We're going to export them all as individual images, and they're all listed over here. Now, you can select all of these, again, by just selecting the top one, hold down Shift, select the bottom one, and now any change you make is going to be applied to all of them. You want to make them all PNGs so they have a transparent background? Hey, no problemo. By the way, another thing you can do, I'm just going to uncheck the United States one because it's a long, thin tag down there. You got all of the state tags. Let's say these were icons and you want them all to be a 100 pixel by 100 pixel images with the artwork right in the very center. You can do that. You come down here to canvas size, say, give me 100 pixels by 100 pixels, and look at that. All of these images would be exported as the same size right into a folder that you want them to be saved into. Also, well, you want to make sure you check them all on like that. You can also export multiple sizes, so you can just hit plus, and you can say, hey, either do a half size, so that'd be a 50 by 50. You can give me a 2x, so that'd be a 200 by 200 pixel image, or anything like that. So a ton of flexibility, but that is not all. There's this problem that people have in Photoshop, and I have it too, where you may have something like this layer, and maybe you're doing something where you need all the transparency, but you also need this image to line up exactly where it is. Let's say you're exporting some motion graphic or something you just want to drag over into Adobe Premiere to work with your video. But every time you take this layer and you right click and say, hey, Photoshop, export this, please work with me. No, you're not working with me. I need a PNG, I need transparency, but I need my image to be in the same spot. I don't want to have to drag this and line it up exactly in Premiere Pro, let's say, or maybe it's a graphic that has to be stacked precisely with other graphics that you're working on. A couple things here. I'm going to cancel this. You can come up here to image, go image size, and just take note of the size of your image, 3000 pixels by 1582, right? So you think, okay, I can go right click, I can say export as, and I can just say, yeah, give me the PNG, and then I can change the canvas size. Let's go 3000 by 1582. But no, Photoshop still doesn't let you do it because it takes your artwork and it puts it right in the middle, which is great for the instance that we just talked about where you have a bunch of icons and you want them to be centered. What's the workaround for this? Well, you used to be able to just throw a layer mask on the layer and right click and export the layer and it would export the whole thing. That doesn't seem to work anymore. Adobe must have fixed that. It worked and it was a nice little workaround. Here's what you have to do. You have to select just the layer or layers that you want and hide all the other layers. So I just want this one pink circle layer. So I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key and click the little eyeball and everything else goes away. And once I've done that, I just go File, Export, Export As up here. I don't right click in the Layers panel. And when I do that, Photoshop says, now you want to export the entire document and the canvas size at 3000 by 1582. And look at that. We're going to keep your artwork up in the same place. This is the way to do it. I wish there was an easier way to do it. It'd be nice if Adobe would put just a little, like a checkbox in the Export As dialog that says, hey, don't trim this image, export the entire canvas, something like that. But in this case, you can then export even a file with a bunch of transparency and keep your graphics in the place where they belong. Very nice. All right, on to the next thing. This is the rotating healing brush, I should say, or clone stamp tool. So how does this work? Well, let's zoom in here on this woman, and maybe we are up here with the clone stamp tool. I'm just gonna create a new layer real quick. Maybe we're up here with the clone stamp tool, and we wanna take this edge of her hair and clone it up here on the top part of her head. So we hold down Alt or Option, we sample the edge of her hair, but of course when we paint, it just looks all not right. Well, we have up here under Window, this Clone Source panel. Clone Source is right here, and in Clone Source we have this option to rotate our clone or our heel. So if I rotate this about 30 degrees, let's say, and then I sample here on the side of her head, we can see, look at that. The clone is automatically going to be rotated based on the degree that we punch in here in the Clone Source panel. And by the way, this also does work with the healing brush, as you can see there. We can just go ahead and heal on that angle as well. So if you're looking to bend the clone stamp tool or the healing brush, get that Clone Source panel open and take advantage of your little angle option that you've got right there. Alrighty, next up. Math in the inputs. What do I mean by that? Well, check this out. We can come in here. We've got this ellipse selected. It's 2500 by 2500 pixels. And the client says, look, it's cool, but it needs to be half that size. Well, we could do the math and say, all right, 1250. Or you could just say divided by 2 and hit enter. And look at that. Photoshop does the math for you. Or you could say something like, I need it to be 60% bigger, so times 1.6, and there you go, it is 60% bigger. Or I want to make it smaller in accordance with the golden ratio, so I can say divided by 1.618, and it's going to make it smaller in accordance with that golden ratio number. You can do this with all of your inputs. Now, we can also do that over here with the opacity slider. So we can say something like, hey, divided by 2, and boom, there you go, 50% opacity. We could say something like plus 23, and there you go, it's 73% opacity. Whatever you want it to be, you can do math in these little input fields, and it is quite nice. All right, let's talk about hyper-targeting of colors and making these type of complex adjustments in Photoshop. This is just a great thing to know how to do. The client hands you this image and says, hey, all this lavender, I actually want it to be redender or something that is the color red. I don't know if redender is a thing, probably not. We can do this. We will just add a hue saturation adjustment layer here, and let's pull this out actually, because I want to make this sort of nice and skinny. Not skinny. I want to make it nice and wide. That's the opposite of skinny, last I checked. And I am going to target all of those bluey, purpley colors. So here under the master dropdown, let's go to the blues and let's try desaturating them. And we can see it's not really doing much of anything. Well, that's one thing. We have the channels we can target, but when we target a channel, we get this little thing that pops up down here. And this shows us exactly what Photoshop is targeting. Here in the center area is the stuff that it's really focusing on, and then it's kind of fading out until it gets to these outermost handles. So I'm going to slide this toward the blues, toward the purples, and look at that. As I do that, Photoshop is saying, all right, now we're finding all those purples that you really want to get rid of. And then I'm going to try to smooth it out over these reds just so I'm not getting any blotchiness at the edges of the color. And the reason I'm going with this extreme desaturation is just so I can kind of see my mask, right? And I can see that, great, that looks good. The dog, he's still not being affected. She looks fine. And now we can do the actual color change. So let's move our saturation back up. And let's slide this to both sides and just look. And here, well, actually here, just sliding to the right. There we go. We've got our red, something like so. We could boost the saturation a little bit if we like. We could even darken it a little. You probably don't want to do too much crazy. This is kind of crazy enough. But you can see how quickly we create what would be an incredibly complex mask in just seconds using the hue saturation adjustment layer and by really dialing in the colors we're targeting with our little color targeting slider option down here. Alrighty, moving along to the 10th thing. Let's talk about using the curves adjustment layer, but in a way that maybe you're not using it right now. And that is splitting the curves adjustment layer so that it only attacks the brightness or the luminosity or the colors in your image. Here's how you do it. Add a curves adjustment layer and simply use the blend mode, luminosity, or color. So let's begin with luminosity. So if I go luminosity and here in curves, I start playing with this and saying, all right, I'm gonna drop my shadows, increase the brightness. I also have my color channels, remember? So I can go here in reds and say like, all right, do I want to make the reds in the image brighter or darker? I kind of want to make them a little bit darker. We can go to the greens. Let's see how that's looking. Maybe I'll boost the greens up there and then I'll kind of bring the greens just back to normal there. And then here with blue, if I pull up, that does, I'm not sure what. If I pull down, kind of has to do with a lot of the atmospheric elements. Let's go up a little bit with the blue, maybe down a little bit with the blue here, something like that. Then we'll go back to the composite RGB channel now that I'm looking at that. And I'm going to boost the shadow point just a little bit, just to kind of fade it a little in the foreground, maybe something like so. And check this out. I'm going to move the layers panel out here for a quick second. If I change my luminosity blend mode back to normal, look at how green and kind of murky and not great the image looks. Then if I come down here to luminosity, it just gets rid of all that kind of color castiness. Now I'm going to apply a second curves adjustment layer, and this one we're going to use the blend mode color. And now we can come in here and begin boosting, either kicking things up or toning things down, depending on what we decide we want. So I'm going to pull down on the color a little bit. Maybe keep a little bit of the color there in the foreground. And then you can go like here, I'm going to come into the reds. And let's see, I can pull up on the red and I'm just watching the sun, right? So I'm really going to make that a nice pinky sunset. And then back here in the foreground a little bit, I'm going to pull some of that red out of the foreground. Great. I can go green. The opposite of green is magenta. So maybe I want a little bit more magenta. Maybe I don't. Maybe I want a little bit of just a kick of green into the foreground and then pull it right back to kind of normal, something like that. And then blue, the opposite of blue is yellow. So I can pull a bunch of yellow into the image, which looks frankly kind of gross. Then I'll boost the blue a little bit and then I'll just kind of bring the foreground back to normal. Maybe add a little bit of blue to the foreground, something like that. It looks kind of nice. Whoop, not that. I slipped with my mouse. There we go, something like that. I don't know. We could spend all day playing with it. There's before, there's after. Did we make the image look better? Frankly, probably not that much. But look at what this looks like if we just set this to a blend mode of normal, right? So what we've done is we've just targeted the colors in the image with both of our, well, with one of our curves layers, and with the other one, we've just targeted brightness values, the luminosity. Using this technique, you can go in and you can use any of these adjustment layers and the color and the luminosity blend mode. Play around with them. You can do a lot of really interesting and cool things. So check this out. Let's say you're looking at this photo and you've got this highlight bouncing off the rock, right? The sun is blasting into this big rock formation, and you want to just really intensify maybe the color and the brightness there of that highlight on the rock. How do we do that? Well, it can be a complex mask, but there's a lot we can do to make it easier. Let's add a curves adjustment layer here, and let's just brighten it up, right? We're gonna go kind of too bright, and I'm gonna come down here to blue, and I'm gonna pull some blue out of it to make it kind of too yellow, and then I'm gonna go to red and push some red into it and just make it really fiery orange, right? Doesn't look all that great. Then we're gonna select our mask, hit Command or Control I to flip it, hide that quickly, and then we're gonna grab our brush tool, and I'm gonna right click, make myself a nice soft edge brush. It can be pretty big, and we're gonna paint with white here, and I'm just gonna paint my effect over this light hitting the rock face, right? And it's making the whole thing glow. It doesn't look great, right? Maybe I bleed over into some of these other rocks, something like that, just to show you how we're gonna create this mask. We're gonna use what are called blend if sliders, and we get to them by going Layer, Layer Style, Blending Options. And what we have are these blend if sliders down here at the bottom. I'm gonna work with the lower one for the underlying layer. Remember, we want to preserve where this orangey color hits the bright spots of the underlying layer. So we don't wanna touch the whites, the really bright areas of the underlying layer. Instead, we want to begin removing this artwork, in this case, this spill of orangey bright light, from the darker parts of this layer. So I'm gonna start dragging this handle over and just watch my artwork, right? I can see, okay, now we're getting rid of some of the stuff that I don't want. And it's kind of looking crackly, right? See how it looks all stippled and funky? We don't want that. So as we really get close to finally having the glowiness honed in, I'm gonna hold down my Alt or Option key and click that black slider, and that's gonna split it. And then I can kind of just fade the effect exactly how I want it to be. Hit OK, and then if I shut that layer off and turn it back on, you can see we've really intensified the way the sun is blasting into that rock face and created what amounts to a very complex mask, but it's very, very quick and easy when you use blend if. Another place where this could be useful is maybe you're working in an architectural type environment and the boss says it needs to be warmer. The light coming out of the home needs to be warmer. Well, we can go Layer, New Fill Layer, Solid Color, hit OK. We're gonna give this kind of like a CTO gel orange color. So kind of, sort of, something like that. And we will maybe set this to screen or the soft light blend mode. Let's go with screen just because it's easier to see. Of course, we'll select our mask, Command or Control I, fill it with black, grab the brush tool. Let's just get a big soft edge brush, and we're gonna begin dabbing in. Yep, up here, we wanna warm that up, right? Doesn't look all that great. We're gonna just throw a little warm light there, a little warm light under there, and a little warm light over there. So it's just warm light that's spilling out all over the place. Maybe this is what you want. Maybe it's not. And if it's not, I've got a solution for you, and it's called the blend if slider. So double click out here on the layer. That also opens up your blending options. And then just the same thing. Pull this underlying layer over. You can see here in the slats beside the window, immediately those are coming back. Hit Alt or Option and split that handle and just start pulling it over and just really containing and constraining that orange. And then maybe at this point I might look at it and say, yeah, I actually want soft light. So something like that. We've gone in and we've quickly made the interiors of our architectural photo much, much warmer. All right, so this is gonna be fun. Have you ever done a mock-up in Photoshop? When you do a mock-up in Photoshop, typically the thing that you are mocking up on, you want it to be like white or light gray. It makes it much easier to transfer shadows and highlights and things like that. So let's say we've got this woman standing here. We want to take this pattern and apply it to her dress. Problem is the dress is this kind of corally red, orange, whatever color this is. We need to make it white. How do you take an object like this and convert it to white so you can build a mock-up on just about anything? Well, check out this little trick. Well, first of all, select color range and we're going to target her dress. Something like this is fine. You can just click around, hold down your shift key, click to collect up all the colors you need, use the fuzziness slider until it looks about right. We are picking up her fingernails. We're not going to be perfect here. We're trying to get through this tutorial before night is upon us. All right, we've got this selection of her dress. What we're going to do is apply the gradient map adjustment layer. You can find this under layer, new adjustment layer, gradient map. That's a good place to find it. Hit OK. In our properties panel, we have a black to white gradient that's applied. And immediately, look at what's happened. It looks like she's wearing just kind of a dark wedding gown, kind of. All the color's gone. Let's double click on our gradient strip. Here in the gradient editor, I am going to select the white point, and I'm going to select the middle point for the white, and I'm going to pull it way over to the left. Interesting. We've really made the dress much brighter, and we still retain some of those shadows. I'm going to pull the black point in just so we can really keep those shadows relatively strong. Then I'm going to begin pulling the white point over as well. We're just going to keep going until the dress is pretty white. I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be perfectly white. Super light gray is probably going to be good enough. And this probably is about what we want. Something about like this, hit OK, and then it's as simple as doing something like this. You come over here, you grab your pattern, Command or Control A, Command or Control C. Well, what I did, select all, and then go Edit, Copy, right? Come over here and paste it in place, Edit, Paste. We've got our pattern, put it over her dress, kind of like that. And we want to just duplicate this mask. So hold down Alt or Option, drag that mask from the gradient map layer, drop it on your dress pattern. Doesn't look great, I know. And we're gonna unlink this, by the way. That way you can select the thumbnail. Now we have the layer selected again. You can move the pattern around how you want it to be. And then we will set this to the blend mode of multiply. Kind of interesting. Then we will double click out here in the open area of the layer. It's gonna once again bring up layer styles. And hey, we've been through this before, right? This time we're gonna play with the blended sliders for the whites on the top layer. Let's split that and try just dragging those back. Look at what it's doing. It's allowing the light color of the dress underneath to come through. Maybe we want to play with the shadows underneath. How does that look? No, not really, actually. Let's try this. You can begin going through and just fuss. It's all going to depend on how bright or dark you did manage to make the dress, and also how bright or dark your artwork is. Ooh, that looks pretty good. Underlying layer, let's bring through some of those highlights. What that's going to do is it's really going to make the shadow look much more realistic. Now, this tutorial isn't necessarily about creating mock-ups. You would probably go and create what's called a displacement map as well. We're not going to get into all of that. The point is, we started with this very vibrant colored dress. We converted it to essentially solid white, and then we were able to apply in a pretty realistic manner our pattern to this dress to create this mock-up. It's a great little technique to use a gradient map adjustment layer to convert colored objects to something that is a solid black or white and still retain some of those shadows and highlights in your object. All right, on to the next thing. Let's quickly talk about 8-bit and 16-bit images and why you should care about them in Photoshop. Let's go File, New. Here I am. I'm going to create a big old 3840 by 2160 document, 16-bit, down here in the color mode. I'm going to hit Create, and I am going to go File, New, and I'm going to create the same exact document, but 8-bit. Let's take a look at what happens here. We are going to grab our brush tool, and that's right over here. And I'm just, big soft edge brush, looks great to me. And I have my swatches panel up here. It's kind of off screen so you can't see it. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna start selecting colors and painting here on this background. So I'm gonna start with a nice red, and I'm just gonna come through and just paint a bunch of different colors. Maybe I'll do something kind of along the lines of the whole Roy G. Biv nonsense. And just see what I can create. Well, that's green. Let's go with yellow. And let's see what we can get here in terms of creating something that looks kind of interesting. All right, it's just a big blob of colors. That's what we've got here. Great. Let's take this and copy it over to our other image. I'm just going to unlock my background, hit Command or Control C to copy. We copy that layer, come over to our 8-bit image and paste it, Command or Control V, and then Command or Control E just to merge that layer down. So we have the same layer, the same exact colors in both of our images. Let's do one thing here first. We're going to go Filter, and I'm going to say Blur, Gaussian Blur. Here with the Gaussian blur, I'm gonna go pretty crazy. Let's go like 400 pixels. So you can see it's just this massively blurred thing. Cool. Let's come over here to the 8-bit image, go filter, and we're just gonna hit Gaussian blur. It's gonna do the same 400 pixel Gaussian blur. Now we are going to apply a few different color effects to this. I'm going to come back to my original 16-bit image. By the way, you can see it says RGB 16, that's 16-bit. This one says RGB 8 for 8-bit. We're going to apply a curves adjustment here first, and we're just going to do a simple S-curve, give me some more contrast, and we're also going to throw a vibrance adjustment layer on this and just say like, yeah, let's boost these colors up really kind of extreme. Now we can hold down Shift, select both of our adjustment layers, Command or Control C to copy them, and then Command or Control V over here in our 8-bit image to paste those exact same adjustment layers. What are we doing here? We're just making a big bunch of changes because I'm going to zoom into 100% now, and let's take a look at the difference in these images. This is our 8-bit image. See all these like stippled lines where the colors come together? We've got just all this banding that's going crazy. All over the place. And this is still a relatively simple edit, right? You can see all these lines, all these colors. If you zoom into 100%, you really can see it. Now, if I go to the 16-bit image and we begin zooming in, well, I can keep zooming in and look at this. It's just perfectly wonderful, smooth color. Maybe a little tiny bit of banding, but if we come down to like the bottom left corner of the image and compare it with the bottom left corner of this image, I mean, you can just see a huge difference where you've got these big chunks of color here with the 8-bit image, and the 16-bit image is just, it doesn't even look like the same image. So this is a huge, huge advantage with working with 16-bit images. Now, it is a bigger file size that you're going to be dealing with, but there's so many more levels of color and tone in the image. You see these kind of changes. If you're doing big blurs, if you're doing massive color changes in photography, you want that 16-bit workspace and edit in that so you have maximum flexibility and maximum quality, smooth color transitions, beautiful gradations throughout your images and graphics. All right, let's talk about the gradient tool and a couple things you can do with the gradient tool. These 3 colors, strips of color, are all the same gradient, but they're applied differently here in Photoshop, and Photoshop gives you the option to apply gradients differently. So I've got these 3 layers, perceptual, linear, and classic. If I grab my gradient tool and I come up here to my gradient editor and I don't know, let's grab any of these gradients. In fact, I'll make a new gradient. Let's go bright red like we have here, and do it to like, maybe we'll just do like to a lighter blue, something like this. Hit OK, and great. I'm going to come down here to classic. Now up here with the gradient tool selected, we have method, and under method we have perceptual, linear, and classic. Well, here with classic, if I just create this gradient across the bottom strip, we can see we've got red. It kind of turns into this muddy middling area before it goes to bright blue. Let's see what linear looks like. Let's go to linear, and we're going to draw the same gradient. And this, a little bit better, but instead of going dark gray, we almost go light gray, but there's definitely more of the blue fading over the red, which is definitely preferable to this dark valley of whatever's going on here in the classic gradient. Let's select perceptual, which generally is going to be the best option for you when you're working with difficult colors like this. We apply that gradient, and you can see we have this nice red color. It smooths out to this very melony red, maybe a little bit gray for my liking, and then shifts into blue. So depending on the design project, perceptual may work. I actually kind of like linear a bit. It just kind of fades nicely. But just know when you're working with your gradients in Photoshop, you have options if you're doing your gradient coloring and you just can't get it to look right. Particularly with that classic, you can run into some funky color combinations that really kind of start to look bad. Okay, and then the last of our 15 tips. There are about 7 million different ways to make selections in Photoshop, and with every new release of Photoshop, the artificial intelligence gets stronger and smarter, but don't sleep on the good old classic quick mask mode. It's right down here. You can just hit the letter Q, you enter into quick mask mode. You can see it throws this little green overlay over your layer. I think that's just because if I double click on my quick mask mode, I have my opacity or my mask color set to green. I believe the default is a red color. I like green. I don't know why. It's like, hey, the green area is going to be the selected area. I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to hit the letter Q again, make sure that that is active and green, grab my brush tool, and I'm going to paint with the big old brush. What I want to do is I want to just make a kind of a rough organic selection of this tree behind our model and kind of try to match the color and light with the greenness of the tree across the street. So let's go ahead here. We're going to paint with our foreground color set to black. And I'm just going to come in here and just roughly paint in a selection. It does not at all have to be perfect. We're just going to come through and get what we can get. It does not, like I said, need to be Perfect. Cool. And then in order to grab the selection, hit the letter Q, and it's going to load your selection, soften edges and all, because if I right click, we are using a brush with no hardness. So we get a nice soft edge selection. Now I can go ahead and throw a curves adjustment layer on, and look at that. We've got this kind of complex mask, which in theory should just be targeting that tree across the street. So let's go down to our green channel and say, hey, be more green like your friend across the street. And then I'll go to red and say, get some of those reds out of there. The opposite of red is cyan. Blue, maybe we'll take a little blue out, make it more yellow, or maybe it needs a little more blue. Yeah, actually probably needs a little more blue. And then we can go to the RGB composite channel and begin darkening the tree. So let's darken you, make the shadows a little darker. Maybe boost the brightness a little, increase the contrast, something like that. And then we're looking at it and saying now it's just too saturated. This is kind of this muted green, no problem. We can just throw a vibrance adjustment layer, or actually I can command or control click the mask on the curves layer, reload our selection, throw that vibrance adjustment layer down, and just reduce the vibrance until the trees kind of match. And that was before, and that is now after making that quick adjustment. And you saw how quick it is. You just go and you paint in that selection. For something like this, it works pretty well. And you don't have to fuss with all kinds of lassoing or trying to use select and mask or the quick selection tool. The quick mask mode is still a really fast and easy and effective way to create these types of selections in Photoshop. Don't sleep on the quick mask mode. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is 15 tips that you really, really, really ought to know in Photoshop. Make sure you visit our sponsor today. They're showing us a lot of love, supporting this video and helping support the channel. Give them a click. Check out the offer down below. Thank you so much for sticking around and watching this. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it. Get it, got it, good. Nathaniel Dodson, tutvid.com. I'll catch you in the next one.